hard to believe that we're here on this side of summer, isn't it? Just a couple weeks ago, Memorial Day weekend, we had, some of you may remember, had this beautiful worship service, a festival of hymns. Does anyone remember what the last hymn was that we sang that Sunday? That's a little bit of a hard question. It's actually one of Melody's favorite hymns, right up there next to Mary Did You Know? It's Here I Am, Lord. Now it's interesting, Here I Am, Lord is one of those hymns that is actually kind of a newer hymn, but it kind of became an instant oldie, and we all probably could sing around the chorus, right? Here I am, Lord, is it I, Lord? I have heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord. Did you pick up on that? Go if you... Here's the thing. I caught myself that morning singing along the song, and I looked at the lyrics on the screen and I wondered if the tech guys had it wrong, or if I remembered the words wrong, because what I was singing, and what probably I was singing wrong all my life, was, I will go, Lord, if you need me. Anyone else? The word is, I will go, Lord, if you lead me. And I've been basically telling God, well, kind of like the response that you get when someone from the nominating committee calls. If you really don't find anybody else, I'd rather not. I'm glad I got you laughing with that. As our summer series inspired by Bruce Reyes-Chow's book is turning into its fourth and final section, which is that part about sharing the good news, I thought that may be the time for my true confession. My misheard lyrics might well be a Freudian slip. That's about how I respond to God when I'm asked to go somewhere and speak and share my faith. God, if you really need me, I'd rather not. Now, I know you think it's probably a little bit funny for someone who is in that pulpit every other week. But don't be fooled. As long as I've been doing this, I've been sympathizing with Moses, who said, why don't you send my brother? Someone who is more articulate, who has a golden tongue, who is able to speak in charismatic ways and with clear sentences, who does not struggle to express with words what's in here in the head or in the heart or in the gut. And no, it didn't get any easier when I once decided I'm going to do that all over in English from now on. And of course, it doesn't help when we live in a society that says loud and clear that, say, a political candidate's tongue isn't sharp enough anymore, that they mumble too much or confuse words, or that the sign they might not be too bright anymore. Now, those are outward blockages, but I gotta say, the inward blockages that I have to share my faith are probably bigger. I shared with you earlier this summer about some theological baggage of my upbringing when I talked 4 or 5 weeks ago about my understanding of God's plan. See, for a good chunk of my growing up years, I was raised with a theology, with an understanding that I was part of an elect tribe with this special commission that we heard about this morning, of bringing the good news of Jesus Christ to the end of the world. And on one hand, this came really with a great sense of adventure and excitement. And I remember when I first heard about that I had to be part of that, I felt important. I'm going to be a change maker. It gives purpose, a sense of what to do with your life, and maybe also a little bit a hinge which vocational direction to pick. But I tell you what, it was also brought to me in a way that was easy and overwhelming burden. Because I was raised with the understanding that it was not just my goal to spread the good news, but actually my responsibility to bring people to Jesus or Jesus to people. In a way of thinking that we are trying to save the lost so they don't go to hell. Which is not only kind of a soul-crushing weight of responsibility on a young person, but I tell you what, it also kind of messes with the relationship with other people when you first meet someone and you try to figure out, are they one of us or not? When you start to weigh them if they are believing the same way you do, or if they do not believe, or at least not the way I do believe. And if they don't, then, well, they turn kind of like into a target audience, right? Someone with a big sign on their forehead. And so I remember clumsy attempts. Sometimes I left a tract behind in a school bathroom. Yeah, brave. Or of trying to wrap a classmate in the school bus into a conversation about God, usually with the detour over creation and evolution. I was never really successful at that. Which was not really a problem, because see, whenever people didn't want to hear the good news the way I understood it, I could tell myself, well, Jesus was rejected too. Except once maybe in a hyped up atmosphere at a youth camp. I was a youth leader. More youth than leader. I had a teenager who was ready, and so I tried to explain the gospel with the 4 spiritual laws. But even then, I struggled with what seemed like such an all too formulaic understanding of the good news that first needs people to feel terrible about themselves so can swoosh in Jesus to save the day. My church growing up had maps on the wall. The brighter the country was, the more churches were there. The darker, the more unbeliever or follower of another religion. In Sunday school and youth group, we heard stories of great missionaries who brought people to Christ, who saved souls. I remember one missionary that we watched videos of who referred to himself as the combine harvester of the Lord. I once half-jokingly told a fellow youth leader in a summer camp, I'm not sure if I'm a combine, I may not even be a harvester, maybe I'm more like the broom wagon at the Tour de France that sweeps up the stragglers who are unable to make the finish line. I could continue sharing failed evangelism stories, you get the point, and I don't want to downplay that. What I want to share with you is a little bit the baggage I bring along about this topic. Because one thing I learned to understand at some point is that however we understand that, what's commonly referred to as the Great Commission, it cannot just mean convert your neighbor, because that means it will kind of mess with the greatest commandment, which is love your neighbor. And when you're just out to convert your neighbor, then your love becomes a tool, a way to make people to believe what you believe. And I think that's a way to misunderstand the love of Jesus. Wherever I land today, I need to think the Great Commission alongside that greatest commandment, or maybe even in the light of that great commandment. Maybe my understanding of sharing the good news is similar to that phrase that is often attributed to St. Francis, preach the good news, if necessary, use words. I know a lot of Presbyterians like that one. I'm sure it's the most impactful way to share the good news, to live the good news. Now I know it can be a cop-out too, because there are times where we should use words. And I wonder if particularly right now is a time where we who believe not just in a certain way, but in very different ways, should use our words. To speak out and to say something, to use other words about what we truly believe than what is commonly used for God. As many things, what is believed about God, even what is preached as good news, is not necessarily good news, at least not for all people. And I think that's where you and I and we all have a particular invitation in this season to share a more beautiful gospel, to share our story along Bruce Reyes-Chow's title, What If Everything Good About God Were True? So if I had to say what is the good news for me personally in a few sentences, and your words may be different. I'm sure they are different. But here's where I would start. I would say the good news is in the words that we heard this morning where Jesus says, I'll be with you to the end of the age. That in Jesus Christ, God is revealed as Emmanuel, the God with us, and that there is nowhere where God isn't. Not on the tallest mountain, not in the deepest pain, not in the greatest doubt, not on the cry on the cross, not in the zones of war or the rubble of Gaza. A few years ago, writer Sarah Miles had a book talk at the Lutheran Center. And at the end of that conversation, she shared a story and asked us the question, which she then said was a trick question. Which word appears the most in the Bible? And we guessed, so God or, I don't know, word or... And she said, no, the word that appears the most in the Bible is with. That's where God is, in the with, in the in-between. And so when I used to believe that my job would be to bring Jesus into a conversation, into a situation, into a hospital room, into someone's heart, as our friend and colleague and former mission co-worker in the slums of Manila, Barbara Stankowski, beautiful, puts it, God has been there long before us. My job is to help discover what God is up to and to participate in it. The second, the good news to me is that God is love, that God so loved the world, and that is not something that is easy for me to believe, particularly when I talk about self-love. Anyone else? That the heart of the good news to me is my belovedness. You can call it dignity, you can call it inalienable right. I already struggle with the word worth because it's kind of a quantifiable word, as if someone's net worth is higher than someone else's. It's sealed in my baptism, where God proclaims over Jesus, and in Jesus over you, over me, and even over them, yes, you are my beloved child. And there's nothing or no one who can take away from that. That was a theme at Triennium a couple years ago. God loves you. There's nothing you can do about that. There's nothing. No guilt, no sin, no failure to do something, no death, no devil, no emotion, no experience that can separate us from God's love. In life and death, we belong to God. And the third one, the good news, I would say, and I come back to my evangelical roots, I would say, the good news for me is that Jesus is Lord. Like the women say on that first day in the grave, He is risen. As we confess in our liturgy at the graveside that Christ is risen from the dead, trampling down death by death and giving life to those in the tomb. I do not claim to understand the mysteries of death and resurrection, but I lean into them anyways. So even in the face of death, we join our Easter song, Alleluia, Alleluia, Alleluia. The good news means that there is always a new hope, a way out of no way. The promise of a new beginning, a way out when we are at our end. It doesn't mean that what is broken is being undone and fixed, but I trust that God's Spirit is mending and healing and renewing And I choose to remain curious for what God's Spirit is up to. I look out for sign for transformation and transfiguration until God is all in all. It's not that I see this every day, but I want to live that way as if this is true. I remember the late Rachel Held Evans. She used to say, even on the days when I'm not sure I can believe it wholeheartedly, this is the story I'm willing to be wrong about. May it be so. Amen.